Welcome to Lecture 29. We're going to discuss the U.S.-Mexican War for a few moments. The larger context for this war would be America's westward movement. Even the term manifest destiny is created here in the mid-1840s as the war begins. The greater context for this would also be sectionalism. You'll see that as we move closer and closer to the 1860s, that the United States is breaking into two distinct sections. A free society in the north with its own distinct interest, and a slave society in the south with its own peculiar interest. And a series of events are going to occur, including the Mexican War, which are going to accentuate these sectional interests and break the United States into two halves, northern and southern halves. Significance for the Mexican War, it illustrates this sectionalism. You find people in the Democratic Party, the Whig Party, the abolitionists, southern slave owners. You find a wide variety of opinion as to whether we should engage in this conflict. The role of Texas is going to be key here. Other significances, the result of the war is going to leave the United States with what is called the Mexican Cession. That is a huge swath of territory in the west and in the southwest, including California, Nevada, Arizona, parts of New Mexico, parts of Utah, Colorado. This Mexican Cession, of course, is going to have to be organized, and the key question that we have to ask is how to organize it, slave or free. So with that in mind, I'm going to make a few comments about the war itself. Texas, of course, is an unusual case, an unusual history as one of the 50 states of our country. It began, of course, as part of New Spain, the empire begun by Columbus in 1492. Texas was on the northern periphery of New Spain, and Texas remained part of New Spain until the Mexican Revolution. In 1820-21, Mexico broke away from New Spain, and so Texas became essentially a province of Mexico. The Mexican government, seeking to make productive this land that was sparsely populated, invited Americans into it. And American farmers and settlers moved into Texas. So by the early 19th century, there were more Americans in Texas than there were Mexicans. This will lead to Texas seeking to break away from Mexico in 1836. Most Americans are familiar with the legendary battle at the Alamo, where the American forces were wiped out by Santa Anna and the Mexican army. This war with Mexico left Texas as an independent republic. This is the only state in the Union that had such a sovereign status. Now, Texas, of course, will be annexed to the United States, 1845, I believe it is. And then, of course, in 1861, Texas will leave the United States and become part of the Confederate States of America. And then after the war, Texas will rejoin the United States. So Texas has a rather twisted history, more convoluted perhaps than our other states. Now, I need to mention James Polk. He is the President of the United States during the Mexican War. Polk comes to office with some clear goals in mind. Texas has already been annexed by the time Polk becomes president. But Mexico has not conceded Texas, so there will be a battle for it. Pope also intends to acquire California, and indeed, I think it's safe to say that Polk's desire, or at least his willingness to go to war with Mexico, is in large part over his determination to acquire California, to make the United States a truly continental country, and to secure our western borders on the Pacific. Polk, of course, also intends to settle the Oregon Territory, the conflict with Great Britain over where the boundary lines should be. between Canada and the United States, and he will accomplish this as well. The actual fighting in the Mexican War, we lost more troops, as did the Mexicans, to disease than we did to fighting. Indeed, probably 10 times more troops were lost to disease. The fighting itself takes place on three primary fronts. There's an overland campaign to capture California. There's a campaign directed against the Mexican army on the Rio Grande River. This is led by General Taylor, of course. And then there's a rather ambitious campaign led by General Scott, an amphibious landing at Veracruz, and then interestingly, Scott leads his army over the same path previously followed 3 centuries before by Cortez. The war itself is significant, the fighting itself is significant because it produces the generals who will command in the American Civil War, which lies only about 15 years in the future. Generals Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant both fight in this war. General McClellan, General Longstreet, General Thomas, Jackson, on and on and on. This, you can almost look at the Mexican War as a sort of graduate school for the U.S. officer class. They will emerge in the 1860s as commanders of the various armies that will fight in the American Civil War. The great acquisitions, of course, are California and the American Southwest. This will ensure continental status for the United States. This will leave some lasting bitterness between the Americans and the Mexicans. The annexation of Texas itself, I should mention, is more controversial than you might think. The abolitionists obviously opposed the annexation of Texas because they feared that Texas, being such a large state, could be divided up into numerous slave states, and they did not want slavery to spread westward. The Democratic Party under Andrew Jackson tended to take a hands-off attitude towards Texas because Jackson, quite wisely, realized that the slavery question in Texas would divide the Democratic Party, as indeed it will in the 1840s, and of course even more dramatically in the 1860s. There were many Southerners who sought westward expansion into Texas so that cotton could be cultivated there, at least in the eastern part of Texas. And there were Southerners who objected to the annexation of Texas on racial or ethnic grounds. I remember one gentleman remarking that the United States was a white Protestant nation and that it should not incorporate Latinos of Roman Catholic persuasion. So you see a bias here against both religion and ethnicity. So in the final analysis, the significance of the war with Mexico lie in the expansion of the United States all the way to the Pacific, the expansion of the United States southward. Mexico loses a huge swath of territory to the United States. We will purchase another portion of Texas. It's called the Gadsden Purchase. This will come a little later, allowing for the sort of a southern transcontinental railroad to make its way to California. The other great significance that I want to re-emphasize is that the whole issue of Texas and the Mexican War tends to aggravate sectionalism in the United States and lays the groundwork for a much more bitter war to follow in about 15 years as the country breaks up over the issue of slavery. So we'll leave the Mexican War there for the moment, and next we'll begin to look at the causes or origins of the American Civil War. Thank you.